Abrogation refers to Allah's practice of canceling certain verses in the Quran and providing better verses. But this is a strange practice since the Quran is supposedly Allah's eternal speech. Why would some parts of Allah's eternal speech be worse than other parts? In response to my recent video about the abrogation of Surah 2, verse 256, there is no compulsion in religion, a Muslim commented, "I'm Muslim. I always hated the idea of abrogated verses in the Quran, and why would God contradict himself? I don't believe in abrogated verses. But I noticed a tune of hate in you. I hope you seek the truth, not loyalty to your ideas. And I'm sorry if the media won't give Christians a chance to speak without called Islamophobic. I think that is one of the reasons why the West hate Islam." Why do they make it so easy? All right, Ibn Said, so you recognize that there's a problem with the doctrine of abrogation. You recognize that if Allah is canceling certain verses and replacing them with other verses that contradict the original verses, then Allah's eternal speech contains contradictions. Your solution is to reject the doctrine of abrogation. You say that you don't believe in it. But in rejecting the doctrine of abrogation, you just became an apostate, my friend. Congratulations. Let me show you how you just left Islam. The doctrine of abrogation comes directly from the Quran. Let's read Surah 2, verse 106. We'll read a few different translations so that we'll be sure to understand it. "None of our revelations do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but we substitute something better or similar. Knowest thou not that God hath power over all things?" Whatever a verse, revelation, do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, we bring a better one or similar to it. Know you not that Allah is able to do all things? Whatever communications we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, we bring one better than it or like it. Do you not know that Allah has power over all things? And for whatever verse we abrogate or cast into oblivion, we bring a better or the like of it. Knowest thou not that God is powerful over everything? Whatever verse we may annul or cause thee to forget, we will bring a better one than it or one like it. Dost thou not know that God is mighty over all? Whatever verses we cancel or cause thee to forget, we bring a better or its like. Knowest thou not that God hath power over all things? So Allah abrogates or cancels certain verses and replaces them with similar verses or better verses. Ibn Said, you've already said that you hate the doctrine of abrogation, which is somewhat ironic since you later accuse me of hate. But the only one hating abrogation here is you, Ibn Said. I absolutely love it because it helps me expose the Quran. All we have to do is look at the historical background of Surah 2, verse 106. We find the historical background in Al-Wahid's Asbab al-Nuzul. Nothing of our revelation, even a single verse, do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but we bring in place one better or the like thereof. Surah 2, verse 106. The commentators of the Quran said, "The idolaters said, do you not see that Muhammad commands his companions with something and then forbids them from the same and commands them to the exact opposite? One day he says something and the following day he retracts it. The Quran is nothing but the speech of Muhammad who has invented it. It is a speech that contradicts itself. Allah, exalted is He, therefore revealed this verse. And when we put a revelation in place of another, Surah 16, verse 101, and also nothing of our revelation, even a single verse, do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but we bring in place one better or the like thereof." So the pagans noticed that Muhammad kept contradicting himself. He would walk out one day and tell his followers, "Allah commands you to do X." Then he would walk out the next day and tell them, Allah commands you not to do X. The pagans mocked him for this. They said, there's no way this is the eternal speech of Allah. It doesn't make any sense for Allah's eternal speech to contradict itself like this. This is nothing but the speech of Muhammad, who has invented it. And Allah responded by revealing that when he abrogates a verse, he brings something similar or something even better, which does absolutely nothing to answer the objection. His eternal speech still contains contradictions. Notice, Ibn Sa'id, you agree with the pagans on this one. I agree with the pagans on this one. They were right. It makes no sense for Allah's eternal speech to be filled with contradictions. This is yet another reason that Muhammad was the most obvious false prophet in history. Of course, Surah 2, verse 256, there was no compulsion in religion, was eventually abrogated, and the pagans were forced to convert to Islam. They were forced to follow a man that they knew was a false prophet. But there's no sword at our throats, Ibn Sa'id. We're free to reject the Quran, since we both agree that it's not the word of God. We're free to expose Muhammad as the hopelessly moronic false prophet that he was. You've already admitted that you find the doctrine of abrogation completely ridiculous, Ibn Sa'id. Now you should admit that you've abrogated your belief in Islam.
David Wood, the same David Wood who tried to kill his father with a hammer and was put into a mental hospital by his mother, has been making the claim about abrogation. Now, this is a very easy claim to refute, so this video is going to be just a very quick refutation of this claim. So, it's hammer time. Let's hammer this argument. Pun intended. All right, so let's go to the verses in question. The verses in question would be the Quran, chapter 6, verse 115. Also, the Quran, chapter 6, verse 34, and the Quran, chapter 10, verse 65. And the abrogation verses of the Quran would be the Quran, chapter 2, verse 106, and the Quran, chapter 16, verse 101. So basically, getting to God's, that none can change Allah's words in the Quran, chapter 6, verse 115. If we read Tafsir ibn Kathir, it says, and none can alter the words of Allah. This refers to his decision that victory in this life and the hereafter is for the believing servants. Allah said in other ayah and or other verses, and verily our word has gone forth of old for our servants, the messengers, and they verily would be made triumph. And our host, and verily the victors. Tafsir ibn Kathir, volume 3, pages 338 to 339. Further in Tafsir ibn Kathir, it says, none can change his words, meaning none can avert Allah's judgment, whether in this life or the hereafter. Tafsir ibn Kathir, volume 3, pages 447. So basically, we see that the Quran chapter 6, verse 34, and the Quran chapter 6, verse 115, Ibn Kathir, who's a well-respected Sunni Muslim commentator on the Quran, hell, even Shias respect him somewhat. Ibn Kathir has explained that this phrase simply relates to the decrees and laws of Allah. Our destiny in this life has already been dictated by Allah and recorded in the preserved tablet. And this is further confirmed in his commentary in the Quran chapter 6, verse 34. So basically, none can change the words of Allah means no one can change what Allah has predestined for everything. In Islam, there's a concept of predestination. Allah, in Islamic theology, Allah knows what's going to happen to me in the future. He knows what's going to happen to you in the future. He knows when the universe will be destroyed and the day of judgment would come. He knows the destiny of everything, destiny of humans, animals, other planets, the galaxies, the universe, etc., etc. So that's what that verse is saying. It's talking about the prophecies that Allah already knows in advance. It's not talking about his verbal words or which would be the Quran, etc. So basically, regarding abrogation, the whole thing about abrogation is that verses of the Quran were not verses of the Quran. The Quran was revealed the way it was supposed to be revealed. So basically, there's an important Muslim scholar named Makkee ibn Abee Taalib. He said regarding the issue of abrogation, in this meaning is from Allah and is meant for the betterment of His worshippers. So He commands them with a ruling at a specific time, since He knows that it will be for their betterment for that particular time. But He already knows that this command will be removed from them from a later time, since at this later time that particular ruling will not be for their benefit. So basically, the theory of abrogation or abrogated verses of the Quran does not imply any imperfection whatsoever on the part of God or Allah, as people like David Wood and other critics say. It does not mean that God made a mistake or that Allah couldn't see the future. Rather, Allah knew in advance and intended to send temporary laws to the Arabs of Arabia that would later on be abrogated once the Muslim society has become established. So basically, Allah or God in Islam initially gave some rulings that were later canceled out or abrogated, but He knew and intended for those verses to be abrogated. So basically the whole thing is, Allah basically knows the future. He knows the fate of what's going to happen to the humans, to the earth, to the galaxies, to the universe, when the day of when judgment day is come, when the world ends and judgment day is upon us, etc., etc. So He knows. So basically, God knows the future. But that doesn't. But just because Allah's speech is eternal doesn't necessarily mean that the literal verbal revelation of Allah's revelation to mankind is eternal too. It can change, but Allah already knows everything, right? He already knows the future. He already knows how everything will play out. So it's possible that God gave rulings at a specific time, and He knew those rulings would later on be abrogated because of the practices of the Arabs or the evolution of the early Muslim community. So that's why there were other verses in the Quran. So basically, Muslim scholars don't know which verses abrogate the others, but verily, the Quran we have today, the 114 chapters we have today, can be applied to modern times, etc., because Allah's speech is supposed to be eternal. Basically, if you read the Quran chapter 2 verse 106, it says, whatever a verse do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, we bring a better one or similar to it. Know you not that Allah is able to do all things? In the Quran chapter 16 verse 101, it says, and when we change a verse in a place of another, Allah knows the best of what He sends down. So basically, Allah knows the best. So basically, if you read the Quran chapter 16 verse 101, it says, and when we change a verse in a place of another, Allah knows the best of what He sends down. So Allah already knows that verses of the Quran have to be abrogated or have to fit the evolution of the early Muslim community in Arabia. So just read the verse. It says Allah knows what He sends down. So Allah already knows that there's certain verses of the Quran which are going to evolve or going to be abrogated later on by other rulings of the Quran. For example, the drinking of alcohol. First alcohol was allowed. First drinking of alcohol was allowed when Muslims were doing prayer, and then later on in the Quran chapter 5, Allah said, no, you can't drink alcohol at all. So basically there was an evolution to accommodate the evolving practices of Muslims. So Allah already knew that alcohol would be banned. I'm just giving this quick example. Allah already knew that alcohol would already be banned, but He did it in a gradual process that abrogated, people doing salah or prayer one, they were intoxicated. Then Allah said, no, you can't drink alcohol at all. It's banned. You can't even, don't even like go near it. So that's the wisdom of abrogation, to make to make it easier on the evolving Muslim. So Allah wanted to make things easier for the early Muslim community. That's why there was an evolution or abrogation of certain verses. As for the pagans not mocking Muhammad for making for these Quranic verses, well, they were disbelievers to begin with. They didn't believe in Muhammad. Like the Meccans didn't believe that Muhammad was a real prophet. Even when he did miracles, like he split the moon in half, he gave the prophecy of the Quran. Gives the Quran chapter 30 verses 1-5 gives the prophecy of the Romans beating the Persians. So Prophet Muhammad did miracles. He did prophecies, or he had fulfilled prophecies come true with the Meccans, and the Meccans still rejected him. So whose fault is that? Is that the Prophet Muhammad's fault, or is that the stubbornness of the Meccans, right? So despite all the evidence for Islam, the miracles Muhammad did, and the prophecies that the Quran, the prophecies of the Quran, which later on came true, and the prophecies of the Prophet Muhammad that came true, the Meccans still disbelieved in him because they didn't want to believe he was a prophet. Same thing with the Jews of Medina. They didn't want to believe he was a prophet, even though Prophet Muhammad, fulfilled, he did miracles, he did prophecies, but they still didn't believe in him. So that's a stubbornness on their part. That's a problem on their part. It's like modern times. Like, no matter how many times you tell people like David Wood and Sam Shamoon, yes, Prophet Muhammad is a prophet because he did miracles, he did prophecies, he called people to worship one God. The Bible's corrupt, according to Judeo-Christian scholars themselves. They still repeat the same arguments against Islam. So we see what happened 1,400 years ago with the pagan Meccans rejecting Islam, rejecting the Prophet Muhammad. We see history repeating itself now because people like David Wood and Islam Critique and Sam Shamoon and Robert Spencer and these other modern day Islamic critics are repeating the same arguments the Meccans or the pagan Meccans did, even though we're seeing the prophecies of Prophet Muhammad come true. We see the prophecies of the Quran come true. We see the miracles of the Prophet Muhammad according to Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Abu Dawud, etc., etc. Yet they still reject it. So it's amazing how history repeats itself, right? People rejected Prophet Muhammad. The stubborn disbelievers rejected the Prophet Muhammad 1,400 years ago, and 1,400 years later, people like Robert Spencer, David Wood are mocking or criticizing Islam, even though they know they've seen the evidence for Islam. They've seen the miracles, the prophecies, etc., etc. It's amazing. It's amazing how history repeats itself. So this is just my brief comments about abrogation, etc., etc. It does not mean the Quran verses being abrogated by later verses does not mean that Allah's speech is not eternal or Allah doesn't know the future. Allah gave an evolution of rulings, of rulings that Muslims should follow because Allah knew the future. Allah knew that situations had to be amended or the situation had to change depending on the circumstance of the revelation. So the revelation changed to accommodate the situations the Muslims were in. That doesn't mean that Allah didn't know the future or His speech isn't eternal. It just means the verbal revelation changed to accommodate God's knowledge of the future regarding the early Muslim community. So I hope that clears up this concept of abrogation in the Quran. Stay tuned. The final videos are coming up.